right, when you hear that, you know it's time to talk fantasy football. We do it live every single Friday. So come on into the room. Join us as we talk fantasy football. Today's broadcast is brought to you by our friends at Cam's Pizzeria. And our fantasy insider is back with us again this week from RotoWire.com. Let's welcome in the indomitable Joe Bartel. What's up, Joe?
Hello. How are you guys doing today?
Doing fantastic. Boy Green, how are you?
I'm doing good. Trey McBride has been double-digit points every single week, so that's what you want when you spend that sort of capital. So blessed be he that it's not you draft a guy and then he sucks, especially at the tight end position where there's this premium. So Thursday Night Football last night, all right. And it wasn't explosive. It wasn't 30 points. It wasn't a Tucker Kraft Packers fan over there night from a couple of Thursdays ago. But I'll take my double digits and I'll move on. I won't be greedy about it. But let's start there, Joe. Let's dive right into Thursday Night Football.
Yeah, a couple of salvageable performances, Joe, did come out of it. And they came out of it late because it looked bad for a couple of really good players before they, pick things up in the fourth quarter or in the second half. Let's talk about it.
Yeah, Jackson Smith and Jake was probably the biggest one of that group and was, I don't know, wide receiver 2 or 3 overall in fantasy prior to Thursday. Only gets 11 I guess it was closer to 12 PPR points, but still not what you're hoping for. And the game script was kind of dictating that the Seahawks were going to just clown the Cardinals throughout. So that you got that production out of JSN is probably salvageable. The McBride one's interesting, and I understand getting 12 points. I think if you're taking him in the third round or mid-third round, early fourth round, you're hoping he's consequentially more than the Juwan Johnsons of the world, the Tucker Krafts of the world, and that he is frustrating despite all the volume. Once again, it seems like Trey McBride is just allergic to the red zone, which I didn't think would happen this season. There was a point last year where I don't think McBride had scored at all. I didn't feel like the Cardinals kind of force-fed it to him in the final couple weeks of the season so that it didn't look nearly as bad, but that we have this basically repeating itself again is certainly frustrating. Sam Darnold played okay, wasn't super awesome. I guess Kenneth Walker was having a really good game until he gets the taunting penalty. Zach Charbonnet punches in 1 touchdown, probably should have been 2. I thought that call on JSN was really dumb, as did the hot mic on JSN as well too. And then I guess the part that was biggest for me was Trey Benson, who I was really hoping would become a staple of that offense. He was used a ton, but of course, Amari DiMercato gets that game-time touchdown as the Kyler Murray and the Cardinals are trying to come back. So, I mean, it's frustrating because I played Benson in a lot of places, but I do think he looked good and that the volume was certainly there through 3 quarters. And if the Cardinals team is as bad as they looked Thursday, Benson should have a lot of opportunities throughout the whole year. And of course, I'm sure we can talk about Marvin Harrison too.
Yeah, it's funny, when you get in fantasy, it's so funny how your allegiances fly around. And last night I'm watching Benson, who I kind of like as a player, but Brian Drake has him, and Drake took me out in fantasy last week, so I'm still feeling a little acerbic towards Brian. I was like, good. I'd like to see that Benson guy not panning out for him, So, yeah, it's funny how
you're not playing him. What does it matter?
Cynical, you get cynical. What's that?
I said you're not even playing him. What does it matter that Benson doesn't do well when you're not even playing against him?
I don't know. Sometimes you root against your rivals. You root against players that your rivals have. You don't find yourself doing that, Boy Green. Don't give me that.
No, you sicko.
Forget it. He'd like to put a stake in all of our hearts every week, Joe. Forget it.
No, I only care about mine. Me, I want to be 1-0. I don't give a flying hoot about everybody else. No. So don't try to drag me into your morass. Don't Joe immediately slams you down. You're like, well, everyone does it.
The poor, keep for the rich mentality, right? I forgot about that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Which, by the way, one other one is just like in a general sense, Marvin Harrison Jr. He seemed to be the bona fide, don't even think about it, like he's just going to be really good. His dad was really good. He's been around it forever. Super safe prospect coming out was going to be great. And that first half was awful, of course. Mm-hmm. And really the first couple of games this season have been underwhelming and drops and everything piling up. Obviously, he got super hot late in the second half late in the second half, and that was great. Mm-hmm. He piled up a bunch of points. But, okay, that was one game. What about the season-long outlook here for Marvin Harrison Jr.? He just does not seem like he's on the same page with Kyler, and that seems to be super concerning for me.
Yeah, I really have an issue with Drew Petzing's offense. You would think that for a generational receiver talented, I think people are going to assume that Marvin Harrison is not over the first year and for a quarter of his career. And I really disagree with that premise, although I also thought Trevor Lawrence was going to be a generational quarterback and was hamstrung by bad coaching. And at some point, I think that's just weighed on Trevor Lawrence, and he's not that sort of guy anymore. So maybe that is the end game path here for Marvin Harrison, that he never really achieves that level. But I think Drew Petzing has been, I would call it obnoxious in terms of how he uses him. And I don't do a really good job of describing this, but the guys over at The Athletic, Robert Mays, in the podcast earlier this summer. I thought they did a really, really brilliant job of outlining that the way that the Cardinals use Marvin Harrison is far more on just deep routes, deep in routes, clearing routes for Trey McBride and James Conner. And you'd think if you have a guy like Marvin Harrison with the pedigree that he has, obviously his dad being one of the best NFL receivers of all time, and I think Marvin Harrison certainly looking at sort of profile out of Ohio State, you would want him to be more of a feature back, a feature receiver. The way the Falcons use Drake London, for example, is I would assume how most competent and normal teams would use Marvin Harrison. That's not what happens in Arizona, and I don't think that's going to change moving forward either. So I had been completely out on Marvin Harrison all year. I was not drafting him anywhere. That tier of receivers was often Jackson Smith-Njigba, Terry McLaurin, Mike Evans was in that mix, Lab McConkey would have been one of the first ones off that, and Marvin Harrison was the most immediate fade for me. I'd rather have Tyreek Hill over Marvin Harrison. I didn't really feel good about that take either. So what's supposed to change? Well, I don't know. I think clearly there's some mental parts. Certainly that first half was part of that equation, but Marvin Harrison is not used enough as a volume receiver, despite the fact that he probably should be. And that alone is reason in my mind to go ahead and fade him from a fantasy perspective.
You know, Joe and I yesterday were having a little private chat about trade and some prospects, and I'd love to talk to you about that, Joe, because I think it opens up a much wider can of worms, and that is we have a lot of top receivers in the NFL not performing at top level, and it's really kind of changed the rankings a little bit. So let's talk about some of those players and whether you expect some of them or any of them to bounce back.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's start at the top. Jamar Chase was typically 1-1 overall. Maybe somebody here knows that feeling, right? Jamar Chase has been disappointing with Jake Browning as now the quarterback for the foreseeable future for the Bengals. You have Brian Thomas Jr., for example, who I think people are rightfully hand-wringing about. A.J. Brown for 2 weeks has been just catastrophic if you're playing him. And you could kind of go down the line. Malik Neighbors has only had, I think one good game from a fantasy perspective. Nico Collins has one good game as well, too. And it gets even worse as you go through it. Like Lab McConkey was a mid-second round pick, and he seems to be number 3 in the depth chart. Terry McLaurin's banged up. Mike Evans is going to miss a month. CeeDee Lamb, my guy, is going to be out at least a month as well, too. So when the top overall gets lobbed off, I think it gets very difficult from a fantasy perspective at that receiver position to say, oh, well, yeah, I mean, don't worry, these guys that we were all drafting highly will just kind of fit in their spot. In reality, it's more like the Roma Dunzes of the world or other guys that have elevated, even Keenan Allen, for example. The way we think about them is tied to their draft capital at the end of August, but with all the injuries that have happened to the top of the receivers and the way those guys have played, we're just kind of completely misunderstanding them, except for the person that has them on the roster. And in the case of Keenan Allen in particular, I think that's kind of found money a little bit too, where you could sell Keenan Allen to a certain extent, but you might just be better off playing him the whole time. And going back to the overall question about do any of these guys at the top end up becoming whatever you're expecting for? I don't mind Nico Collins. I think if I'm the Texans completely floundering, there's a point in this process where I'm saying, well, what if I just give this guy all of the volume? Like, let's just forget the scheme. Let's forget trying to run and set play action up. What if we just have Nico Collins be the guy? And in that scenario, I think Nico Collins would totally thrive. And I'm very disappointed with probably more of the offensive line for the Texans, but also a little bit of CJ Stroud. I think that'd be very frustrating if you had Nico Collins right now. But at the same time, I look at everybody else in that same sort of range and say, well, at least this guy's healthy. And I know he does get injured at various points in his career with the high ankle stuff that we've had the past 2 seasons, but it's not like he has like soft tissue injury issues very often. And Nico Collins makes catches more than Brian Thomas Jr. does right now for the Jags. I have no idea how that's supposed to go. So that's probably the one that I feel best will be able to maintain his value or get closer to where his draft capital was. It's a really frustrating thing, I think, if you're drafting any of the receivers outside of Puka in the first 18 or so picks.
All right, let's go overall here, and it's part of the headline of the video, so I want to get to it quickly. When is it time to panic? And I'm talking about season-long leagues here, because we're 3 weeks in, and I saw ESPN have the statistic that somewhere in the ballpark of like 20% of teams that play fantasy football right now in their leagues or something are 0-3 or whatever their number was, and it was just a sizable number. And a lot of people, there seems to be a split. Some are like, I drafted this team, I will die on this team. And then they'll keep going down. There's others who are like, oh, good Lord, I need to trade everybody. The entire team's a disaster. And then, of course, there's teams in the middle that do a little bit of this, a little bit of that. What do you have to do? Because 3 weeks in, and especially in our format specifically, there are punishment. There is penalties. There is discipline. There are all those things. If you fall in the bottom 3, you get booted out of the league. So there's big incentive when you get to 0-3. You start sweating a bit like, oh boy, don't want to be in that bottom 3.
Joe, before you answer, let me just answer the front part of this question for you. When, Boy Green, do you panic? Never in fantasy do you panic. Now, when do you start making moves? When do you start amending your roster? I think that's really what we're asking, Joe, here. Because if you're a panicker, you're done for. Then you should be doing something else. Because panicking and fantasy football, those two things don't go together, in my opinion. Joe, respond to that if you want.
Yeah, I would actually argue, Boy Green was going over a bunch of different things that would happen at this point of the fantasy season. I think for most people, they're agnostic, where I don't know, if we're going to say like 5 million people are playing fantasy football this year, how many in your 12-team league were roped in at the last second or doing it because their spouse was doing it or their friend or whatever else? And they might be 1-2, 0-3. Yeah, okay, whatever. This is not my year. Like, I checked out. It's probably the way I would describe the majority of the people that are playing fantasy football in that spot. So to your point, Lurch, yeah, I mean, probably people aren't panicking because they just don't care. Like, they're not sickos like us in that regard. I do think there's time to panic, and I think it's probably next week. Like, if you are 0-4 or 1-3 and your team is either banged up due to injury or guys have underperformed, let's just say you're relying on Isaiah Pacheco to be running back 2, or you have Brian Thomas Jr. as a wide receiver 1. Like, there are going to be instances fantasy-wise where, especially not due to injury, you're looking at the barrel right now and being like, man, I don't know how this really turns around. Being active on the waiver wire has been a helpful tool in past years. This year, I mean, it really hasn't been. I mean, the Keyshawn Booties of the world, Juwan Johnson's probably the top waiver wire pickup right now overall. Yeah. In our league, Zach Charbonnet was stupidly cut. I don't know why that happened, but for the most part, there aren't really moronic things that happen in free agency at the moment with your rosters, and you're left with a lot of wide receiver 4s or 5s or low-end tight end 1s as the major stuff. That will probably change, but the way that we've been consuming fantasy, and I think the way that the running back position broke down this year in drafts, the Trey Bensons, the Blake Corums of the world, your ideal player that would step in if somebody gets injured, they're almost all picked up. Like, Woody Marks is probably a great example of the Texans. I don't know if he's rostered or not. In our format, I think he probably is, because Brian Drake does a great job of shuttling through 15 running backs every single week. But that's the type of player that you could maybe capitalize on in most of those leagues. But the way we consume fantasy football now, that's different than it was 10 years ago, where Woody Marks probably wouldn't be discussed at all, or he'd be like, oh, wow, this is Arian Foster sort of scenario in past years too. So I mean, I don't really panic because I do this for a living. I'm also in 17 different leagues. There's a little bit less importance for every league because of that. But yeah, I understand people being worried, especially with getting demoted down to relegated to a different league. Like, that's a tough spot to be in for sure.
Well, good for you, man, child, that panic is not in your vernacular. No, when you give this thing, I'm like, what? I am 100% panicking, which drives decisions.
Over the years, I've been in bad spots, as you know, in our leagues, and nobody wants to be relegated. We have, for folks that maybe are not familiar with our leagues, the bottom 3 teams in each of our leagues gets demoted to a lower league. And it's the top league. That's the big prize. It's called the Champs League. And you want to stay in that league. You don't want to get relegated. And, a few years back, I was in trouble. My team started terrible, as Joe was saying, but I didn't panic. I just got busy. I just really was on the waiver wires, near the top of the waiver wire list every week. So I had to make sure, I was getting 1 or 2 of the guys that were at the very top that I thought could help me for even sometimes for a week or 2. I started playing week to week. So I didn't panic. I was worried, but I didn't panic. I think there's a difference when you start unloading guys. Let me ask you this about that scenario, Joe, because this is one of the things that I think is never a bad idea. It might be a little too early to do this for some teams, but when you do get into this mode of, I'm not really competing and I need to compete, do you trade? I always think it's a good idea to trade a superstar for 2 pieces. It's like you get 2 starters for 1. Now, I know you're giving the other guy, who's likely probably one of the better teams, a really good player that might cement them to move up higher in the standings. But at the same time, you can get yourself back into the middle of the pack, which in a league like ours, you care about year to year. Go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, this specific format with the relegation part of things, I think it makes sense and actually allows for more trades to happen because of that. But overall this year, I'm doing 2 SiriusXM shows every single week, one on Friday here in just about an hour. And then on Saturdays, it's been 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern on Ancient Fire Radio. And that one I've been taking a lot of calls on the air, and I'll get a few trade questions. And I felt like more now than ever, let's say 3 or 4 years, a 2-for-1 deal makes a lot of sense. Now, maybe you were somebody that was speculating on the Amari Hamptons or Travion Hendersons or RJ Harveys of the world, the rookie running backs disappointing early on, or you have suffered one of the injuries, like you missed Joe Burrow, so you're trying to get another elite quarterback. Like, there's been so many instances over the course of this first month where I have felt like there are times where you can execute a 2-for-1 and both sides come out ahead. More often than not, the default answer is if you are getting the best player, you're winning that trade. But when the best players, again, are almost smoothed out at the top, we talked about CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Nico Collins, Brian Thomas, when all that is smoothed out at the top, you can speculate still on if you think that person will return to what their draft value is. But more importantly, that also makes the middle tier, let's just say rounds 4 through 7, have a bit more value and elevated to a certain larger group. And when there's multiple pieces in that spot, in that sort of tier, you can execute those 2-for-1 trades a lot more. So not just relegation leagues like what we're in right now and discussing, but I think overall this year, when that first, I would say 18 picks or so has become more like 4 picks that are valuable, you can execute a lot of 2-for-1 trades, and I think both teams come out ahead.
All right, let me get another one in here, Joe. For some, we pull out the violins when the injuries happen and, geez, James Conner, geez, CeeDee Lamb or some of these guys. But it opens up doors for other players potentially to step up. Right. So my direct question is, because I have him in one league, I wanted him in as many leagues as possible, but I think I only got him in 1 or 2. It's George Pickens, who I was very high on with the Cowboys and their passing volume. And I was intrigued because I didn't think CeeDee Lamb was going to get hurt. So I said, right, he's going to be the Robin Hood's Batman all year. That's great. But now that CeeDee Lamb is gone, the volume has to get funneled somewhere. How big of an uptick is there for a guy like George Pickens in this Cowboys offense?
Yeah, I think he got bailed out a little bit with that because I don't think George Pickens would have ever been that sort of receiver, but he certainly will now over the next month and possibly longer. I mean, I don't know if the Cowboys are as bad as we think they are. It wouldn't be smart to throw CeeDee Lamb out there. Lamb seems like an ultra competitor, and Jerry Jones is dumb, so I would assume Lamb plays at some point in the year. But yeah, I mean, I think that was a mindset that a lot of people shared. I was not one of them, and they'll probably get bailed out because of that. Kevontae Turpin can't be that guy. Jalen Tolbert can't be that guy. And you can only throw so many 5-yard passes to Jake Ferguson before that becomes not something that could do either. So I think we'll find out Sunday night against the Packers defense. I expect the pass rush to be good. I think the Cowboys will actually be pretty gamey. I don't know. I mean, if the Packers hadn't, of course, shockingly, but not shockingly to me, lost against the Browns last week, I would have thought this would be a trap game of sorts too, because they'd be riding high as they have been through the early portions of the season. But because they suffered that embarrassing loss as well to the Browns, they should be able to play up to that level. But Keyshawn Nixon, 5'8" corner, Carrington Valentine, more like 5'10", those types of bodies you wouldn't assume could really be able to stop the George Pickens of the world. Noah Brown, that's fine for the Commanders, but a George Pickens, I think he'll actually probably do pretty good. So, yeah, I think over the next month, Pickens probably elevates to like wide receiver 15 overall in fantasy.
Talk with Joe Bartel, our fantasy insider. We do this live every Friday, starts sharply at 10:30, so you want to get into our room beforehand. Ask some questions in the comments. We're going to take a quick break. Today's broadcast is brought to you by our friends at Cam's Pizzeria. When we come back, listener questions coming up. Stick around. Man-Child Show with Boy Green Digital right here.
When you think of Cam's Pizzeria, think about 2 of your favorites, their zesty buffalo chicken wing pizza or their tasty chicken bacon ranch. Over 16 specialty pizzas made fresh daily with the best ingredients. Indulge in their homemade calzones, subs, wraps, salads, and their famous cannolis for dessert. They're all made with love just for you. Order online for 10% off at camspizza.com. Locations in Camillus and Oswego. Cam's Pizzeria. It's love at first slice.
All right, we are back live with Joe Bartel, RotoWire.com, at MC Show Digital. That is the YouTube channel. You want to subscribe, hit that subscribe button. Of course, hit the thumbs up, like. We love for you to do that as well so that our product gets out to more and more people as we grow our channel. Talking fantasy football here on a Friday, and time to do some listener questions. Boy Green, want to pop one up? Let's take a look at what listeners are thinking about today and what questions they have for Joe.
Yes, we'll start off with our boy, Bubba Badshaw here, which we appreciate. Thank you, everybody. And again, everyone watching, go to our YouTube right now, or even if you're watching on the Man-Child Show, Boy Green Digital, submit your questions in. Utilize Joe Bartel's brain power for your own selfish benefit. Badshaw says, do I start Baker or C.J. Stroud or roll the dice with Jackson Dart? Hey, spell Jackson Dart's name right, pal. There's an X in there, and maybe you'll learn his name after he does a phenomenal debut. I love Mayfield, but kind of worried about him playing the Eagles with some of the weapons out. And yeah, let's just answer this question, then I'll have a sort of a follow-up question off it. But Baker Mayfield, CJ Stroud, or Jackson Dart?
Yeah, and this guy is celebrating Joe Burrow having a turf toe injury that requires surgery. So I don't know how much you really feel good about answering his questions when he's doing that sort of thing, because that's the only way in which Jamar Chase ends up not being worth an overall number one pick. So again, like your boy Green's been like, oh, I mean, I love George Pickens this year. Again, you're getting bailed out. I think that thought process of Chase being not a top 5 selection is also being bailed out by this Burrow injury. I will attack this both ways, and I think overall Baker, CJ Stroud, or Jackson Dart, those 3 options is a by default for me Baker Mayfield. I am worried that there's no Mike Evans. I am worried that Emeka Egbuka probably will still be limited. I don't know if Tristan Wirfs makes his season debut, and while the Buccaneers are 2-1 against this more or less version of the Eagles, including the playoffs of the past couple of years, I think this is a very limited Buccaneers team right now. If we get to the end of January, early February, we're just having this conversation, I think the Buccaneers actually will be able to contend with the Eagles. But at this point, with the way both teams are on injuries, I think I am concerned as well, too. The only issue is CJ Stroud has been even worse. And, I mean, let's get to the Jackson Dart part of this overall. I understand, especially in this region where we are talking right now, the optimism for Jackson Dart. I completely get it. I think Jackson Dart by default has to be better than Russell Wilson, who can't stop throwing the ball out of the end zone when the game is theoretically still on the line. He knew that the Giants suck. I think he knew the Giants suck all year. So that Russell Wilson's doing this is not surprising to me at all, because I think he signed up for being the commander of a 4-13 team anyhow. Jackson Dart is not going to be a fantasy relevant guy right off the rip. And the only reason is because we have a battle against the Chargers, Broncos, and 2 separate Eagles games over the next 5 weeks. The only time in which you should be rostering in a normal 12-team league Jackson Dart is against the Saints. So we all get hyped up. Here's a first-round pick, late first-rounder, by the way. The NFL is telling us Jackson Dart is not all that good or valuable because multiple other teams really didn't want to draft Jackson Dart high. Jackson Dart will be a better quarterback as the season progresses. The only part, and I know you guys will be doing the NFL picks part in just a second, or I guess later in the show or whatever, a West Coast team traveling East Coast for a noon Eastern time kickoff or 1 p.m. Eastern time kickoff historically is when the West Coast team would fall flat, especially a team that's riding high 3-0, having gotten 3 division wins. There are reasons to say the Chargers won't play up to the level they have. Even still, I don't think we're expecting 200 yards passing and maybe 20 yards rushing from Jackson Dart. That's Sam Darnold numbers from last night. Nobody watching Sam Darnold was like, I was really excited to start him. So Jackson Dart should not be rostered. I mean, frankly, in a single QB league, Jackson Dart should not be rostered. He should not be a trade asset right now. Pick him up in October, end of October, early November. But right now, we're all kind of going off the hype of a first-round quarterback starting him. They shouldn't be.
So, I'm a Giant fan, Joe. I didn't even think about picking him up, to be honest with you.
Right.
And I'd love for him to be successful, but he's just not fantasy relevant. I agree with that. Go ahead, Boy Green.
Yeah, it just sort of the follow-up on it. What is your temperature in general? Because everyone loves the Family Guy scene that we get to bring up all the times. Yeah, sure, there's a boat, but there's a box. And there can be anything in the box, like a boat. So everyone's intrigued by the rookie, right? Or the unknown commodity, the backup quarterback in the overall real football. But as it pertains to this, everyone is intrigued by what they don't know. How do you balance that? Because obviously Jackson Dart, you've made it very blunt. So let's put Jackson Dart aside. Any unknown commodity that could become available that people are sort of intrigued by, how do you balance how much stock you put in it?
I mean, he hasn't hurt you. I mean, this is the unknown commodity overall hasn't hurt you, and therefore you're not scorned from a fantasy perspective. This is the answer too often for a lot of these things is you just haven't been hurt or burned by it. Travis Hunter's another great example as well, too. The interesting part of what he could be offensively and defensively, like, I want to see what this is. I want to be a part of basically the movement, right? And in reality, these things don't take shape. So like Drake May last year is a perfect example, ends up being the starter closer to October or November for the Patriots. Drake May didn't play all that well from a quarterback perspective, but fantasy-wise, he gave you some fantasy points from his legs, from just like rushing close to 20, 30 yards per game, something like that. I think that's what Jackson Dart will do, and there's going to be a point in time where I want Jackson Dart on my team. It isn't right now, and overall, again, I just go back to the answer, like, they haven't hurt you, so therefore, that's the promise of the box, is that a player isn't even going to elevate to be like an elite player. They just haven't burned me enough times for me to be upset by them.
Yeah. All right, Joe. More listener questions. Again, put them in the comments. If you're waiting, don't forget to give us a thumbs up, like, and subscribe to our channel. If you're not already subscribed, we're giving away a $400 golf club to one of our first 500 subscribers, and we're less than 200 away from that. So, folks, get in on it while it's hot. Absolutely no purchase necessary, as they say. All right, here's a trade question for you, Joe. This comes in from Jesse M. Jesse, thank you for your question. He says, trade J. Will Monty Montgomery,
Javonte
Rashee Rice,
Williams.
okay,
Mm-hmm.
right. 4, nice little abbreviation there, Bijan and Matthew Golden. All right, and he gives you all the parameters here: redraft, 14 team, and all the points and the rest of his roster. I mean, boy, Joe, you got to sift through this.
Bijan, Lurch again, French Bijan.
No, it's Bijan.
It's back to Bijan?
He said it, yes. Bijan, in the opening game, talked to reporters before the game and said he likes and wants to be called Bijan, and that Bijan, his grandmother and someone else in his family wanted him to be called. He wants to be called Bijan. So he's Bijan to me, Boy Green. You could call him whatever you want. Joe, go ahead.
But no, just in general, can we fix all this? Because it's been Tyrod forever. I know this isn't fantasy relevant. It's Tyrod. Baker's like, by the way, I was his teammate. It's Tyrod. And everyone went, oh my God, Tyrod. And then he's asked by the broadcaster, no, it's Tyrod. What is going on? Say your name.
I didn't even know that. I've been still calling him Tyrod. Okay. Yeah, my example would be Robert Tonyan, and then Robert Tonyan for the Packers, the 1 year that gets 10 touchdowns. Yeah. All right. So this is difficult to view if you're seeing it on here, but the roster part is important for this context. Again, 14 teams matters a lot for this. Also, half-point PPR. It is much more touchdown dependent of a league. This is a lot to give up for just Bijan Robinson. And if it's Achane, Javonte Williams, and Benson, that Benson will now be a fantasy relevant running back the rest of the year is something to capitalize on. Even if you're not trading Benson away or Javonte Williams away, when you have 4 different running backs in 2025, right now, the way fantasy is being played, when you have 4 different running backs, you should be trying to tier up. That's what is happening here when somebody's trading for Bijan Robinson. They are tiering up to that spot. But Matthew Golden right now, I don't think is going to be an asset for you, and that's the issue that I have, that Justin Jefferson, Cortland Sutton are fine, Emeka Egbuka's okay. When Rashee Rice comes back, this person right now, and they mentioned it in their record as well, I could have guessed it already just by looking at it, you are giving more value to the rest of the league than what is helping your team. So there are some times, even in the scenario where you're getting an elite player like Bijan Robinson, that you could say, oh, well, my team's going to be better for the rest of the season. What I don't want to happen is when I have an advantage over, let's just say, 12 other league members, with this running back depth that I have, with the receivers that I have, with Rashee Rice coming back, I don't want to put myself in a spot where I'm adding a 4th member of the league that I have to worry about. This trade might do so. If you can tier up from Javonte Williams, that's fine. When you have a Trey Benson as your running back 4, I get the process of doing it. But I'm not giving up multiple assets to make another person in my league better. You are already winning by having all of this on your roster, even though you can't play it.
Fascinating stuff.
Which again, boy, I like that. Talked a lot about that. I actually do. I mean, look, you're always trying to make your roster better. But I do, when I'm thinking about trades, and in particular when I'm thinking about trade partners and whose rosters I'm going to look at in the league, I do care about which teams are performing well, because I don't want to be helping those teams more and having them pull away from the league. I want I'm looking to move up, but I'm looking for balance. So sometimes it pays not to make a trade with a team that already has tremendous depth. I mean, it has to be a consideration. It doesn't have to be the end all be all. You don't have to be a total snob, but I do think it's a consideration that has to go into the blender a little bit.
Yeah, I think, again, we're all trying to win our fantasy league, theoretically. I talked about agnostic earlier. I think there are some people that join a league that are just happy to be part of the community, right? And then there's nothing wrong with that as well. But if you're a crazy competitor like me, you want to win the league. There are other ways to do it than just having the best players on your team. Kind of just suffocating the opportunity for other people to have a competent team is one of the ways that I think we don't discuss enough fantasy-wise to be successful week in and week out. When you have 4 separate running backs that are starters every single week, the natural thought process is, can I either tier up and get rid of some of this depth, or can I go ahead and say that one elevates, like a Trey Benson, to be an obvious start for me? And I understand the rationale behind trading away multiple pieces of depth. In a 14-team league, you will never feel like you have depth. So anytime that you're like, oh, I actually have a lot of people here, you should tell yourself that's a win in itself. In a 14-team league, that's a win in itself.
That's true.
All right, let's fire through a couple more here before we sign you off here, Joe. So Badshaw, I knew Jamar Chase wasn't worth the first pick. He's saying that he just thought he was overrated and all these other things. But I want to transform this into a question. So I have Jamar Chase. And some people, when the Burrow injury happened, I saw they immediately traded Jamar Chase. They're like, we got to get rid of him. I'm not doing that. But what are realistic expectations now? Because perhaps things have to be recalibrated with what you thought you were going to get with a healthy Joe Burrow, and now what you do have here with Jamar Chase.
Yeah, I actually was very I was not very concerned at all with Jake Browning as the quarterback. We saw it 2 years ago that Jamar Chase was totally fantasy relevant. T. Higgins ended up being fantasy relevant too when he was healthy. And the concept of he was a backup quarterback, therefore we can't pass the ball. I didn't believe at all. I mean, I think Jake Browning 2 years later would have probably been better. Was not a great example against the Vikings. Now, that was like an all-time Isaiah Rodgers performance. A single individual literally winning the football game the way the Vikings did was pretty crazy. It certainly was a mellow tone for everybody, but I'm not really trying to get worried about it too much. The only issue is, I mean, this Broncos defense is pretty good, and I think if there was ever a scenario where it repeats itself, it is literally Monday night against the Broncos. So I have concerns about Jamar Chase this week, and there's probably a buy low part of it come next week after 2 straight dud performances, which I think is going to happen. I called it the Mendoza line, the T. Higgins Mendoza line, where there's a Michael Pittman's and Chris Olave's of the world that I will much rather play over T. Higgins this week. And I put that on the RotoWire Fantasy Football YouTube page up there right now, like going over some of the start-sit options at receiver. There are better days ahead. I truly, truly believe that. But Jamar Chase, instead of being like a top 5 automatic play every single week, you're still playing Jamar Chase. But I think you should think of him more like Tyreek Hill, where last week we weren't certain if we should play him over the Bills. He scores a touchdown, it's fine. But like that's where I kind of see Jamar Chase fitting in for the future.
All right, we'll go rapid fire here, Joe. Andrews or Jerry Jeudy needs a flex. Which one you like?
Yeah, I'll play Mark Andrews, even though I feel great about it. I think Jerry Jeudy is going to get kind of shut down by that Lions defense. And I don't think the Lions will sleepwalk in that game either, like the Packers did the week before. So give me Mark Andrews.
All right,
you, Bill the Produce guy. Johnny Boy.
Terry being injured, should I get Luke McFerry?
McCaffrey.
McCaffrey. Yeah.
I like how they have to tag on. That's Christian McCaffrey's brother, as if that matters at all to this equation. I put that in the waiver wire article that if Terry McLaurin's out, Luke McCaffrey is the one that sort of benefited. I think Jalen Lane is a better talent and better player than Luke McCaffrey, but we're talking about super deep leagues where this even matters. I think consequentially in our leagues that we're in, the Champs League, Chumps League, things like that, there are much better receivers than Luke McCaffrey who can play right away if McLaurin misses time. But I don't mind Luke McCaffrey if you have to in super deep formats.
And any concern with Khalil Shakir? I know Boy Green has him on his roster. There's got to be some concern there. He hasn't been getting the ball a ton so far here in the early part of the Bills season.
Yeah, and Keon Coleman probably fits too, and especially with the Bills favored by 16.5 points over the Saints this week, you could say, okay, I mean, if the Bills get out to that lead, how much are they really passing? I keep answering this way. The only way the Bills actually get out to that lead is if Josh Allen does what you're supposed to do. So don't feel like you need to bench Josh Allen. I think Khalil Shakir is fine as a flex play. I mean, he's gotten over 10 PPR points in 2 of the 3 games for the Bills, and that offense is really good. I would rather be involved in an offense that's really good as opposed to one that's not, like Jerry Jeudy and the Browns, for example. Like, there are a bunch of those different offenses out there. So, I mean, it's frustrating. Khalil Shakir was drafted in, round 9 for a reason, because there really wasn't a lot of ceiling for him, but I think the floor is totally fine.
All right, Joe. Well, as we say, another one in the books. Fabulous. Looking forward to getting into the middle part here of fantasy season. It's week number 4 for everybody. So everybody out there, best of luck in your fantasy leagues. Joe, we'll talk to you again next week.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
All right. There he is, Joe Bartel. Sayonara, and that'll do it. A little bit later today, NFL picks coming your way where we pick every game against the spread. Joe's in on that as well. We'll see where he is in the standings. Last week, tied for first. Is that still the case? We'll find out in just a couple of hours. All right. We'll see you. Take care, everybody.